Today's story will leave you speechless. It is a story about pride, strength, and the lesson that respect should never depend on rank or appearance. So sit back, open your heart, and witness a moment that changed the entire base forever. The air at Fort Raven was thick with heat and dust. New recruits were lining up in formation, their boots striking the ground in rhythm. The sun hung high over the training ground, burning the sweat into their skin. They were the next generation of soldiers ready to prove themselves. But among them stood a quiet figure, a young woman named Evelyn Hayes. She didn't look like much at first glance. Her frame was slender, her face calm, and her eyes carried a stillness that made others uneasy. Most of the recruits assumed she was weak. Some even whispered that she must have joined by mistake. What none of them knew was that Evelyn wasn't a recruit at all. She was the incoming Admiral sent undercover to see the real behavior of those who claimed to serve with honor. The commanding officer, Colonel Briggs, had arranged it himself. He wanted to see how his men treated those they thought were beneath them, and he had chosen Evelyn, one of the Navy's most decorated officers, to make that test unforgettable. When training began, Evelyn stood at the back of the line. The drill sergeant barked orders and their crew shouted responses. They ran laps, did push-ups, and lifted heavy sandbags. Evelyn did everything silently, her movements precise, her breathing steady. She never complained, but some of the men noticed her silence and mistook it for weakness. One of them, Private Mason, grinned at his friends as they whispered cruel jokes. "Watch this," he said. He walked over to her during break time, smirking. "Hey, recruit, you sure you're in the right place? Maybe you're lost." The kitchen's on the other side. Evelyn looked up at him, her eyes calm and unbothered. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she said softly. Her tone wasn't defensive. It was confident, almost chillingly so. But Mason didn't back down. Neither did his friends. Later that day, during combat training, Mason and two others were paired with Evelyn for sparring. They decided to teach her a lesson. The sergeant blew his whistle and the three men surrounded her, grinning like wolves. Evelyn stood still. She didn't raise her fists. She didn't even take a stance. The first man lunged at her, and before anyone could blink, she sidestepped, grabbed his arm, and flipped him over her shoulder. He hit the ground hard, gasping for air. The second man came charging, but Evelyn moved with lightning speed, kicking his legs out from under him. He crashed beside his friend. Mason hesitated, his confidence cracking. "What the hell?" he muttered. Evelyn turned to face him. "Your move," she said quietly. He swung wildly, but Evelyn ducked, stepped in close, and with one clean motion disarmed him and pinned him to the ground. The room went silent. Even the sergeant stared in disbelief. When she released Mason, she simply walked away, her expression unchanged. The other recruits whispered among themselves, trying to understand what they had just seen. That night in the mess hall, the whispers grew louder. Some said she was a martial arts champion. Others claimed she had military training before joining. Mason sat alone, staring at his food, embarrassed and angry. He couldn't stand the thought of being humiliated by someone he thought was weak, so he decided to get revenge. Later that night, Mason and two others cornered Evelyn behind the barracks. The lights were dim, the air heavy. "You made us look bad today," Mason said, his voice low. "You think you're better than us?" Evelyn looked at him, calm as ever. "No," she said, "but I think you can be better than this." Her words made him angrier. He lunged forward again, but before he could reach her, a sharp command echoed through the darkness. "Stand down." The voice came from the shadows. The men froze. From the darkness stepped Colonel Briggs himself, flanked by two senior officers. Their recruits instantly straightened, their faces pale. Briggs' eyes were cold as steel. "Do you know who you're talking to?" he asked quietly. None of them answered. Briggs stepped aside and gestured toward Evelyn. "Recruits," he said, his voice echoing through Third. "Meet Admiral Evelyn Hayes, the new commanding officer of this base." This silence that followed was unbearable. Mason's jaw dropped. The others looked like they wanted to vanish into the ground. Evelyn stood still, her expression unreadable. Briggs continued. "She has led missions you couldn't even imagine. She saved lives, commanded fleets, and carried this nation's flag to places where few dared to go. And tonight you treated her like a nobody." The recruit's eyes dropped to the ground. Mason felt his stomach twist in shame. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice soft but steady. "Respect," she said, "is not about rank. It's about character. You can salute a uniform and still fail as a soldier if you forget the humanity inside it." Her words hit harder than any punishment could. The next morning, when Evelyn arrived on the training ground in full uniform, the base was silent. Their recruits lined up, eyes straight ahead. The sun rose behind her, casting a glow on her medals, her rank insignia shining proudly. Colonel Briggs saluted her. "Admiral on deck," he shouted. Every soldier stood at attention, the sound of boots striking the ground in unison. Evelyn looked at them, her face calm yet full of quiet power. She walked down the line, stopping in front of Mason. His face was pale, his eyes full of regret. "Private Mason," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he stammered. She looked at him for a moment, then extended her hand. "You have strength," she said softly. "Use it with honor." For a moment he didn't move, then he took her hand. That single gesture broke the tension across the field. From that day on, Mason became one of the hardest working soldiers on the base. Evelyn's leadership transformed Fort Raven. She trained her recruits with fairness but demanded discipline and heart. Under her command, the base became one of the most respected in the region. Months later, when news of their performance reached the higher command, the same recruits who once mocked her stood tall as part of her elite team. One evening, as Thiessen sat over the training ground, Mason approached her again. "Madam Hayes," he said quietly, "thank you for not giving up on us." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I didn't have to forgive you," she said. "You learned the lesson yourself. That's what makes a real soldier." The flag fluttered above them, golden in the dying light. The base that once laughed at a quiet woman now saluted her every morning with pride. And so her story became a legend, not just of strength but of grace, forgiveness, and the power of quiet courage.